Alrighty, good morning, everybody, for June 17th, 2025. Game six of the Stanley Cup Finals is happening tonight in Florida. Stanley Cup in the building. But on the show today, I have Steve Vogelsang, former CTV Winnipeg sports anchor. And yeah, you're looking into being a mental health advocate as well. And I saw you on Prime with the sexiest man in Winnipeg. So there's a lot to cover here, but let's get into the Oilers.
Sure, okay. Uh, uh, can you recall, Steve? Because I can't. And I'm talking about I can remember the Montreal Canadiens in
Mhm.
76, 77. They won the cup in the final, they swept both years. So going back that far, and I know you don't go back that far, but can you recall a more vexing and mercurial team than the Oilers have been in this year's playoffs as far as their lack of consistency? Can
Yeah.
you remember a team resembling the Oilers in recent memory?
No, I really can't. I mean, they were kind of dead to rights versus LA. It's game three. I was in bed that night. I thought, okay, it's over. I had to get to bed early because daughter had a volleyball tournament the next day. And somebody had inboxed me saying, the crowd kind of knows what's coming. The LA coach calls that challenges that goal, and then it kind of turned everything. They lose that challenge. They land up scoring on the power play, and then they kind of go on this run, and it's like I don't know. Maybe it's the Corey Perry curse. I kid a bit, but
It,
it's
yeah,
something else.
it
It really
really
is.
is. Because the Oilers have been responsible for, in this year's playoffs, both the absolute worst, they probably have the bottom three performances,
Yep.
and that includes some of those dogs that the Jets turned in on the road. But at the very least, the worst two performances of the playoffs, and probably the top two performances. I'm talking about individual games,
Yeah.
uh, which, so it, who's going to win tonight? I no clue. I was surprised by how flat the effort was in game five.
Yeah, I didn't see a lot of it. I took my kids to the fair. I tried to watch it on my phone. There was parts of the fair where I could watch it on my phone and what have you. So I didn't see too much. But like even Thursday, so I'm at the Bomber game and I'm seeing 3-1. I come home, my wife goes, they were actually down 3-0. Holy smokes. Uh theater, great theater in the building. You got yeah, I'll bring it up. You got Swift and Kelsey in the building. They come down from the 3-0. They'd land up tying it late, Florida, and it's just okay. You thought they would carry that, and nothing transpired. I
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
the weekend. Everybody's ready to go. That crowd was lit.
yeah, yeah. And they came out with that basically the same listless effort that we had seen in the first period of the previous game when they fell behind 3-0.
Right.
And now I don't know, who do they start in net for tonight?
Well, I think they're going to go back with Skinner.
They are, eh?
That's kind of my guess. Martin
They,
Brion goes. I kind of changed my mind, but I think you kind of have to go back to him. There was joking maybe they'll bring up the third goalie.
yeah, that I thought that as well because you know Pickard was pretty average in the last one.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, and I mean, and that's become a joke in the playoffs too. Once they score a second goal, get Skinner out of there because it's not his night.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. And when Pecker came in game four, okay, yeah, he's stopping everything and things are happening. It's kind of like, the pitcher goes six, and then okay, you bring in Rivera for the ninth. Uh,
It well, and we talk about the Oilers like they're playing in this series alone, but the reality is it might just be. that Florida is too good. They're too experienced. They're too stable emotionally. They're too well coached that no matter what their opposition does, Florida can adapt and do what they need to do to win. Because right from Paul Maurice down, they are a very complete team, aren't they?
Well, they sure are, right? And Bieksa kind of referred to this to the game on Saturday as games 5 and 7 versus Toronto, where Max Domi gets that goal, gets him into it, and then boom, they score right away. They shut it down. I mean, if it goes to game 7, something has to give. I mean, Paul Maurice hasn't lost a game 7 in his entire career, which is
Is that right?
something, yes.
Wow. And
Uh,
they fired him in Toronto.
I mean, it's hard to believe that was almost 20 years ago, where he was hired, right? And
That was that long ago in Toronto, hey?
it was, and and now he's on the verge of he's been to 3 straight Cup finals, um, on the verge of winning his second in 2 years. I mean, this is pretty incredible stuff. Maybe kind of comparable to Andy Reid with all those years in Philly, never getting it with Don McNabb and Terrell Owens and all that, and then found the magic potion.
Yeah. Yeah, the potion that, and that will always be a fly in the ointment of the Jets' history that such a well respected coach would go, okay, I'm done. I can't do anything with these guys.
Right.
I got to go. Because Paul Maurice is no quitter, um, but I always thought that more should have been made of that. When a coach of that caliber says, I can't do anything with these guys, well, then you don't let the coach quit. You change the guys, not the
Yeah,
coach.
right. And there was talk of, okay, with the core, rumors of riff in the room. I have no knowledge, but you hear these things, and he said he could only bring this group so far, right? And I always go back to 2018, like that was the year. Uh, it it just was, it's a bounce here and there, and it's definitely unfortunate what took place. I know he still has roots here in Manitoba and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, a flare in the ointment. I would definitely agree with you.
Yeah, yeah. So, uh, yeah, so the decision may not be Edmonton's to make as to who wins tonight.
Right.
It may well be that if Florida asserts itself, and certainly it could be argued Florida's done a better job of shutting down Edmonton's two best players than vice versa.
Right.
Like Marchand and Bennett are having much better series than McDavid and Draisaitl.
Yeah, no question, right? And last year we saw Draisaitl not score any goals, and then McDavid gets his one, and so it's kind of reverse. Again, not that secondary scoring. They're chasing games. They haven't led a lot. Um, it is quite something. And then, if Florida wins tonight, then the drought continues. The Bombers ended their drought, but now we have since 1993.
Yeah. I think if Florida wins tonight, Marchand is going to win the Conn Smythe.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Well, I one, you'll get the sentimental vote as a 37-year-old.
Right.
Two, and there's always people that choose these what I call the score sheet pick. Well, Bennett was the leading goal scorer, therefore he's the Conn Smythe. But it could be argued the goals Marchand has scored are more important in terms of their timing. But it also, I think, goes in his favor. He's leading the playoffs in penalty minutes. That's not reckless play, that's being engaged. And when you're taking penalties and scoring, you're having an impact on the game. It's hard to argue that anybody's had more impact than Marchand in this year's playoffs.
Yeah, no question. I think he's probably one of the greatest trade deadline pickups ever. I mean, Let's just be
Well,
honest. Like in recent memory, I know somebody had posted it on my page there, and I was racking my brain, and I can't think of any.
well, and I wonder if there are some noses out of joint behind closed doors in the NHL. Other teams going, well, how did they get to be the ones to win the Marchand sweepstakes for not a lot?
Right.
I wonder if maybe it started with Marchand himself, where he said, no, I'll just play out the string here and go to free agency. Or if you could trade me to a contender where I can play golf on my off days and they have low taxes, then I'd go. Uh, because, man, what a bonus that was. And it was a no brainer of a trade. Um, so, if the Leafs were smart, they'd be giving Marner money to Marchand and they try to hire Paul Maurice away. I don't know what his contract status is, but if Toronto is to build a playoff capable team, that certainly would be the way to start. Paul Maurice is clearly a playoff coach, and Marchand is obviously a playoff player. Certainly, and so anyway, that's another topic. What the Leafs should do.
Yeah, they've been asking that question since 1967. So,
Yes, and
uh,
everybody has a theory.
well, I mean, Gary Fraser could be one of them. Sorry.
Yeah.
The high stick in Game 6 that was missed, and he openly admits that he missed that call. So we're almost coming. We're just past that anniversary of that call.
Oh yeah,
Again, I don't know how to remember these things, but I remember I bought my Doug Gilmour rookie card on the day of Game 7 between LA and the Leafs, and they lost, and that was
I still remember the Wendell Clark Marty McSorley fight in
yeah,
that series.
Game 1.
And I mean, Wendell Clark was a rugged guy, but people oftentimes forget he wasn't actually very big.
No,
He was maybe 5'10,
right.
and he wasn't like he was jacked either. He was farm strong, but he was giving away probably 4 inches and a good 30 pounds to Marty McSorley, and yet stood in there as they slugged it out. Uh, in one of the most memorable playoff hockey fights going, because if you'll recall, that occurred after McSorley had taken liberties with Gilmour.
That's right. And Bob Cole was going nuts, and there was stuff being thrown on the ice, and yeah, I mean it is definitely a childhood memory at age 14.
Yeah, yeah. And not a moment's hesitation from Wendell either,
Nope, just
right?
right in there.
Right in there. Um, so, yeah, well, uh, you may recall Wayne Gretzky said Game 7 was the best game he ever played.
That's right.
And so that's what it took to keep the Leafs out of the final, the greatest game by the greatest player who ever played.
Yeah, and it would have been an all Canadian final. The first one's
Yeah.
the Flames
Leafs
had
Montreal, a
absolutely nothing.
dream final.
It would have been amazing. I remember watching the National, and Pamela Wallen was always like, "It's going to be a Canadian final. This is it." And Barry Melrose, I think from the same hometown as Wendell Clark, as well, right? He was like,
Is I can't think of where Wendell is from in Saskatchewan. Um, it'll come to me.
yeah,
But I didn't know Barry Melrose was from there. Uh, Joey Kosher, also Wendell's cousin.
that's right.
Um, uh, can you remember the name of the town?
I should be able to. I mean, I have my phone here. I can quickly look it up, but
Not important.
sorry,
Uh,
everybody. Uh,
it'll come to me
I know it's around Saskatoon. I want
because
to
my sister lives nearby in a town called Foam Lake.
right.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, it'll come to me.
Mhm.
Anyway,
Good, good.
we've drifted a bit from tonight's cup final, but uh, the Edmonton needs somebody to do something extraordinary tonight.
Well, I'm gonna predict that it's gonna be Nugent Hopkins. Why not?
I do think they really are missing uh, Hyman
Oh, no,
in
no
this
question
unit.
about that, right? You know, he had so many hits. He had like 109 hits. It was nuts.
And he's also dangerous offensively,
Hmm.
because of course that's been an issue with Edmonton, with Draisaitl and McDavid getting shut down. Can somebody else step up here?
Yeah. Well, and that was always Edmonton's issue. And then it was happening. They were getting that secondary scoring, but that hasn't really happened here. And so
No.
that
Uh,
is that
Connor
is a
Brown
thing.
was at one point emerging as one of the most underrated players, but he's sort of faded as well.
Hmm.
He was scoring some important goals and so forth. Um, but yeah, you're right. It it the most likely individual to spark something is him.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so let's go with that and see how that goes. And the benefit of being on the West Coast, if it goes into overtime, you're not really burning the midnight oil per se.
No, it does take some getting used to, because I live here in the Okanagan. It's already hot. It takes some getting used to. It's 30 degrees at 4:30 in the afternoon, and I'm tuning into the hockey game.
Yeah.
But I do like it because in Winnipeg, you know, on the Saturday night doubleheaders, I never saw the third period of the second game.
That's exactly it, right? You try your best and then you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay, what's that? I better go to bed.
Yeah,
That's my
yeah.
that's my
Find out you
experience.
missed the most exciting ending ever.
Right. Yeah. No question. Let's transition a bit. We'll kind of work a bit backwards.
Okay.
Uh, so when we talked on the phone a few weeks ago, you said that you're taking steps to now be an advocate for mental health, which I think is awesome. Considering we're post-pandemic, mental health is definitely something that people are more open to talk about, and yeah, I just think that's great. Would you like to expand on that?
Well, I I don't want to waste the destruction of my own life at my own hands. I don't want to waste that.
Hmm.
Like I you know, I destroyed my reputation, my career, many friendships I had, the relationships I had with many family members. Not to mention, uh, the damage I did to the victims of the robberies themselves. So, so when you create that much damage, to then just walk away and leave all those all that ruin and rubble doesn't make sense. So, and I'll back up because I always provide this little codicil that I don't blame my actions on my mental health troubles. I knew what I was doing. I'm no victim. Wasn't like I couldn't tell right from wrong or anything like that. Um, However, I couldn't look anybody in the face, in the eye, and say, oh no, I was at my absolute best.
Right.
Of course I wasn't. Um, a number of things had gone wrong in my life, most of them due to bad decision making, a little bit of bad luck. But even then, people have those struggles all the time without going off the rails to the extent I did. Um, but the bottom line is if I had taken care of my mental health, then the other things like the end of my marriage and job loss, and I went broke and I lost my house, all of those things I would have been better able to cope with if I had just shared my struggles with someone. That's going to be my message because I'm of a generation where men didn't talk about their mental health struggles. And you didn't say, I had 5 lifelong friends. I had a great many friends. I didn't tell any of them how I was struggling. Instead, I lied to the world to conceal my struggles and what a mess I had made of my life, how difficult, the difficulty I was having coping. And these are very typical things for middle aged men, especially if they are not acculturated to be open about their struggles. Like the suicide rates for middle aged men are much higher than any other group, with the exception of perhaps teens. I don't know that exactly, but I do know suicide rates for middle aged men are much higher than suicide rates for middle aged women because we're not talking about our feelings. So, as a way of at least creating some good out of the bad that I did, um, I I want to try and destigmatize mental health issues by sharing my story and saying to people, tell someone. If I just told one person, everything might have been different.
Yeah.
You know, I might never have affected those poor bank tellers as I did. Never mind the damage I did to my own life, I wouldn't have impacted anybody else's. So, with the documentary, we live in a culture of credentialism, as you know.
Yes.
Um, so, with the documentary coming out, not my documentary, but about me, and it's not a great documentary, but it does at least introduce the topic of mental health. So, hopefully, I haven't started to shop my book yet. Um, but I will be doing that soon. Hopefully, it gets published. And now you need some excuse to be the guest speaker somewhere. People want to know, why should we listen to this guy? Well, he was the subject of a documentary, and he's the author of a book. Oh, and he has a podcast. Oh, okay. Well, that's all people need today to say, okay, I'll listen to this guy then.
Right.
They'll pretend they've seen the documentary and that they read the book and that they listened to the podcast and probably did none of the above. But if I can, once those things are in place, if I can transition from that to being an occasional speaker, maybe in companies that have a large male workforce, perhaps, and they want a mental health seminar, if you will. And mine would be simple. The takeaway would be tell someone. Don't be ashamed of this. A lot of guys are struggling. And mine, I often say I want to use my story as a cautionary tale. Mine isn't exactly a cautionary tale because the odds of somebody going to the extremes I did, I'm not saying if you don't attend to your mental health, you'll become a bank robber. But I will say, if you don't attend to your mental health, it doesn't usually end well. And so, anyway, so that's my plan over this next number of years is to hopefully use my story and share it with others so that maybe some people see themselves in there and go, well, I'm getting like that too, where I'm canceling social occasions. I've lost interest in the things I used to do. I'm too depressed to even leave the house. I'm lying to everybody to conceal this lifestyle that I've adopted where I live at home with the drapes drawn, and that's that. Uh, so I'm uniquely positioned to go around with that message.
Hmm.
So I'm not going to I'm not going to run and hide.
Right.
My story's out there anyway. I'm not going to live in obscurity. I already bear the shame and the embarrassment and the humiliation of it. Not to mention whatever, I guess the guilt is what I feel for the poor people I robbed. So I already carry those things around anyway. So hiding and then nobody gets anything good out of this, I think that's kind of a cowardly way to go. So instead, I'll own it, I'll talk about it, and maybe somebody else gets something out of it. Who knows? But it's at least it's worth a try.
Right. If you turn a situation, for good and, help other people along the way, I think that's a great thing to do. So, um, you know, yeah, I mean, all the best with that. How did the documentary come about? Sexiest Man in Winnipeg. Who kind of reached out to you, or how did that all kind of develop and that sort
Well,
of thing?
how it came about, a freelance writer from New York City saw my story somewhere uh, and thought this is a great story. So he flew out. I was in Drumheller Institution. They don't call them penitentiaries anymore. Um, so he flew out and interviewed me. And I don't know that he ever actually sold the story. But anyway, he had a friend in New York City who's partners in a production company, a documentary production company, this outfit, Vespucci Productions.
Right.
So they too thought, wow, that's quite a unique story. Uh, so they reached out to me while I was inside and arranged, and we actually did an interview, a Zoom interview with me in prison. They didn't use anything in the documentary of that, but that's not surprising. I mean, they, I don't know how many hours of interviews they had of me, um, but the documentary's 80 minutes long, and they had dozens of hours of interviews. Uh, so anyway, uh, they asked me about it, and I said, well, I'm not interested in participating in a documentary that is just a salacious and titillating recounting of the bank robberies. That doesn't that doesn't help anybody, and it's just going to make me look even worse. I'll just look like an attention whore bringing up the past to get attention again. So I said I would participate on the condition that you explore the mental health angle, that's included as well. This isn't just a true crime documentary. So so they did that minimally, I think. They held up their end. The subject of my failed mental health is in the documentary, but for the most part, the documentary is what they wanted to make from the get go, which was a quirky true crime documentary. Um, is it a deep dive into depression and middle aged men and their mental health struggles? No. Um, but it does at least address that. And that was my concern from the outset was would they say, oh, yeah, yeah, no, of course we'll do that. And then it wouldn't be in there at all. Well, they did hold up their end, not excessively. Like certainly if watch the documentary, it doesn't really answer the question, well, what happened? Like what were the events in this guy's downward spiral that brought him to that point? Because as a friend pointed out, the documentary isn't really about me, it's about the crimes.
Yes.
And in fact, they could have done the same documentary without even having me in it. Uh,
Correct. Yeah. That's it was interesting because they interviewed some of your past coworkers in Peter Young, Bob McGregor, Lisa Bowes, former guest of the show. And I was like, okay, wow. And they, just kind of this shock and awe, like, what? Just, Steve would do, just getting kind of that reaction, building it up, and then yeah, showing you in these various cities and interviewing police officers in Regina and Medicine Hat and that sort of thing. So yeah, there was that plot and just kind of trying to build up those surroundings.
yeah, yeah. Um, and they, perhaps my biggest criticism of the documentary is they tried to create some controversy by indulging this speculation that I did it for the attention. And that's weak journalism because, as documentary filmmakers, they know the truth that that wasn't a thing at all.
Right.
Like, that's utterly baseless speculation, not the least of which you can't in Canada go on a crime spree and then write a book about it and get rich. You can't. I'm writing a book, but it's about my mental health downfall. How much reference there will be to the bank robberies in there is up to the publishers. There may be none, but it's not a book about bank robbery because you can't do that. Also, the idea that someone would throw away a perfectly good life and reputation that took 25 years to build, then spend 3 years in prison, a year and a half of them in one of Canada's most dangerous prisons, that being Drumheller. Good buddy of mine inside got murdered while I was there. You know, risk that, um, destroy so many relationships, negatively and likely permanently impact the victims, that somebody would do all of that as part of a plan. Yeah, and then it'll come out and cash in.
Right.
Like it, as I say, it's baseless speculation. Um, it's a really exciting theory, but the documentary makers put it in there knowing full well that's not anywhere near the truth.
Hmm.
So I didn't love that. You know, they they probably shouldn't have even bothered putting it in there, or they should have answered their own question. Did he do it for the attention? No, you can't do it for attention. You can't cash in on a crime spree. And so, anyway, uh, I definitely didn't do it for the attention.
Did you have a chance to view the documentary before it went to Prime?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Um, and and I saw it. The finished version was the first time I saw it about a week before. So I wasn't very happy about that because in my talks with Vespucci, I had said, well, what if there's stuff in there that I don't like? Well, I'm sure we can work it out. Well, how they worked it out was never showing it to me because they didn't really have any plans to change it according to my desires anyway, because there would have been stuff, if I'd seen it 3 months in advance, I would have said, well, that's not journalism.
Hmm.
You're putting something in there and you know it's not true. This is a documentary,
Right.
but it's a documentary in the loosest sense of the term. It's a true crime story. And don't let the the old don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. Because the bottom line is, It hasn't been sold in America yet, but they would like to do that. That's where the money is. And uh, that's where the audience, they won't care about this guy, Steve Vogelsang. People that know me and know of me, they watched it because they cared about Steve Vogelsang. But in another market, they could care less about that. The takeaway is the robberies themselves, right?
Right.
People like to talk about, yeah, and then the guy went to a restaurant next door and had lunch. And those are the
Yes.
takeaways people will
Yeah.
have from that. Um, so if I had objected to certain parts of it, they'd have been like, too bad. You don't have editorial control. We put that in there because we like it. So sorry. So no, I didn't get an advance viewing, nor did I get a say as to what was in there or what wasn't. Because that's what defines a documentary is, and I used to say this to my students about writing. What defines a writer oftentimes is what they don't write, what isn't in there. And, there's, people that have tried to draw conclusions about me from the documentary, they need to remind themselves that what they don't know is what was left on the cutting room floor, as they used to say.
Hmm.
Um, you know, what comments aren't in there? One review said that I wasn't remorseful about my crimes. Well, you can't make that declaration based on somebody else's documentary.
I've
That,
heard, I've heard that too. So
yeah, yeah. I mean, how do you know? How do you know I didn't express my remorse over and over, which I did, and it just isn't in the documentary,
mhm.
right? If somebody were to read, it sounds like I'm shilling for my book now, but if somebody were to read my book and then after that they go, I read the book, he's not remorseful at all, fair game. But you cannot make that determination based on what's said in a documentary because you must consider what might have been said but left out. Because again, that wasn't the documentary they wanted to make
Right.
about the aftermath or anything, how bad I felt, or that it took me 2 years to really grasp the damage I did. That was after the fact. The documentary was about the robberies,
Right.
not its psychological effect on me or the people uh, that I robbed and terrified.
Well, they were trying to make it more or less, entry level to maybe Dateline. They were just missing, Lester Holt or Keith Morrison.
Yes. Yeah.
And then yeah, showing the hotel, the Medicine Hat. I've stayed there and whatever. I mean, I'll go back. It's just, it's like, oh, you recognize, like I've driven these roads, and it just personalizes it. And again, you were very revered here in Winnipeg. I've talked to people, yeah, that you were it when you lived in here in Winnipeg. And now for the plays of the week, like these sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
Sorry if that's my best imitation. Uh,
Uh,
like when they saw you at a Bomber game, you mentioned this in the interview or in the documentary. People would recognize you.
well, and I have learned, as you might imagine, a lot about myself. 3 years inside gives you a chance at a lot of introspection. And and this is something that a lot of people are having trouble getting their head around. Well, you did a documentary, but you claim you don't want a lot of attention. And what I've learned about myself is I'm a performer, not a public figure.
Hmm.
And you can't be one, at least in 1990s Winnipeg, at the end of the golden age of television news,
Yes.
you could not be a performer without being a public figure, right?
Right.
I was known everywhere. A big part of my job, the mandate was to get out in the community. So the only person that's been to more events than I have is Sylvia Kuzik. She's like Gretzky as far as the runaway points leader, but I would be Ovechkin. And I, with the exception of the Ukrainian sportsman dinner, which I loved, uh, with the exception of that, I hated every single public appearance because I was usually an MC, occasionally a guest speaker, but usually an MC. And every single time I'd go around the house and say, why did I agree to this? So
Really? Hmm.
yeah, it and I had to be this persona out in the community that people connected to this Steve Vogelsang on air persona. You know, this garrulous, outgoing, hey. But in fact, I'm a very private person. I lived in a house in Winnipeg from 92. We sold it in 2011. My wife might have opened the curtains when I wasn't home, but they were never open when I was.
Hmm.
I didn't want to even look out at the real world, much less have the feeling of it looking in at me. So now I live my life in obscurity where I live, and my notoriety exists elsewhere. And I will always keep the two things separate now because once I got out of prison and had an opportunity to create a brand new life from a blank slate, there are no public appearances. I would never again, other than to go and be, you share my story
Right.
in some sort of mental health advocacy role, I would never again be the MC of a function. I haven't joined anything. I'm I'm a private person, and I didn't know that about myself when I chose a career in media. It was because I wanted a career telling stories. I wasn't at that age, my late teens into my 20s. I wasn't able to say, well, oh yeah, that'll also mean a public persona and a public role in the community. And wherever you go, you're going to be this Steve Vogelsang guy.
Right.
Of course, I wasn't able to see, nor would I have known at that time that I didn't like that stuff. I assumed I'd love being famous, and I didn't. Every time somebody, hey, Steve Vogelsang, I'd be like, it. So anyway, for those people that have been wondering about, well, how can you do a documentary? You don't want attention. I don't have attention where I live. It exists elsewhere,
Yes.
and 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 that's how I will do my advocacy work as well. Is it won't happen where I live.
Hmm.
It will happen elsewhere.
Well, that's a fascinating point you bring up. Like we always think, oh, the people that are you know, play the sports and the movies, these sorts of things that they like that oh they quote have made it. They like to be recognized, but that's not necessarily always the case. Um, that is a fascinating thing to me, and I mean that's okay. But you wanted to tell stories in a career. So I mean, your love of sports came from something that projected into something completely else that you probably weren't expecting.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. If I could do it all over again, and I explore this theme in my book, that uh, I came from a very dysfunctional home. I
Mhm.
guess we would say an abusive home. Um, and like many kids, this is not unusual. Kids in homes that are lacking in love and support seek it elsewhere. They seek external validation through the parents of their friends or teachers or coaches or their classmates. They become the class clown. And I did that as a coping mechanism so that I could say to myself, no, my parents are idiots. Everyone else loves me. The fault isn't with me.
Right.
So I was probably a natural performer anyway. And then I got better at it because I did it a lot every time I left the house. So it was natural that I would seek a career doing what I did naturally, that being performing.
Right.
But if I could do it again, my life over again, and particularly if I'd grown up in a loving, supportive environment, I would have my original education at the U of S. I took Canadian history because I was going to teach social studies if the TV sportscaster thing didn't work out. If I could do it over again, that's what I would have done.
Hmm.
Being in the classroom would have fed my need to perform. I probably would have run the after school drama program. Maybe I would have been in community theater, not exactly, recognizable figure around town. Certainly not to the extent I was in Winnipeg and Manitoba at large. But that would have been enough for me. I didn't need the public adoration. So if I could do it again, yeah, I would do it entirely different than what I did.
That is fascinating because at the time you did sports, like, okay, well, there was Off the Record with TSN, and then Jim Van Horn was on. But if you didn't have cable, like you were it. Like CTV, Global, Joe Pascucci, all those
Yeah.
guys. I'm not mentioning another network, but
No, that's it. I
right,
mean,
like
I don't
it,
work for them anymore either.
yeah,
You know, yeah,
that
like
that
remember the
yep.
days of a 30-minute global sports line every night
Hmm.
with Gene Principe and Joe Pascucci?
Great,
Like, sorry,
no problem.
at the supper hour, at one point we had 12 minutes of sports
Hmm.
at supper time
Yep,
because at that time, Sportsnet didn't even exist originally in the 90s. It came along later.
98.
Yeah. Yeah. So TSN, that was it. And it was seen more as a late night highlight package.
That's right.
And even then, not everything was televised. So for local sports, you watched your local station.
Yeah.
Like at one point in Manitoba, about one out of every three people watched some sort of news at the supper hour.
Right.
Like that's a big, it's not like that now.
Nope. Not at
Uh,
all. Everybody's got it on the phone or whatever else. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I bet like last night, 11:30. Oh, okay, I'll switch over to CTV. Like it's like, oh, I better get some local stuff in here, right? So
yeah.
yeah, but you have to like program yourself. And now they've gotten rid of weekend news, and that's a whole nother topic except for Toronto. Um, so yeah, that pendulum has shifted. So my point is like you were it. Like it was you guys were it. And so yeah, you become more recognizable. So yeah, I can only imagine being at a Bomber game, being in Section T, and somebody from Section S says, "Hey, Steve Vogelsang," right? Like,
It. I remember I went to Amsterdam. I started teaching in September 2002. So the following summer, I backpacked through Europe, something I never did in my early 20s and I always had wanted to. So now I'm 39 and I backpacked through Europe. And my first night, I'm in Amsterdam and I'm walking along and I hear, "Hey, Steve Vogelsang." And I'm like,
Yeah.
like I've been looking for anonymity for years and I can't even find it in Amsterdam. Same thing happened to me in Strasbourg, France. But, and to be clear, I loved the job. Having a creative outlet, that's why I chose sports over news, was in sport, as long as you get the score right, you can take whatever path you want on the way. News, you're restricted by the facts and by objectivity, which was never a hindrance to me as a local sportscaster. I never really bothered with objectivity. I knew the market I was serving. I don't care if Eskimo fans, they were the Eskimos then, uh, were offended that I called them the filthy Eskimos. Not
Right.
my problem. I'm serving the audience here. So I did love the job. It was the outside of the job that eroded me uh, to the point where I was no longer recognizable to myself.
That is, I know I've said this before, but that is, fascinating. It's intriguing because, yeah, that is a byproduct, and again, we all think that's kind of welcomed, and it's like, um, sometimes, yeah, people just kind of want to do their job, punch the clock, and go home. And by the sounds of it, that's kind of what you wanted to do.
Yeah, well, I often, and I'm not putting myself into this class, but say somebody like Adele has a beautiful singing voice, but why should we assume because she has that she wants to talk to the people in her audience?
Right.
And that's the difference between a performer and a public figure. A performer addresses people, public figures, people address them.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm not interested enough, maybe, uh, in people that I wanted to constantly be addressed by them. Maybe that makes me sound terrible. Uh, anyway, I'll stop talking on that one.
No, it was a thought that I had years ago that yeah, everybody's like that, but no, not everybody is. And when people do take the time, it's like, oh wow, you take the time, and that's all good. But whatever path you take, I think that is totally up to you. Um, so a couple things. What were some of the favorite sports stories that you covered in Winnipeg?
Uh,
You were here when the Jets left to go to Phoenix in
which, of course,
fall
would be my least
spring,
favorite
spring of '96.
um, because that changed everything.
Mhm.
Going from the NHL to the IHL, and bless Mark Chipman's heart, had he not brought the I to Winnipeg, there never would have been an N in Winnipeg again. But in the NHL days, and I was first hired by Peter Young. At that time, CTV had the Jets local rights. So I was hired, I was going to be the host of the Jets games in the next season. But we lost money on the Jets. So the new guy running the station, a genius. He said, we can't be laying people off so that we can televise the Jets. We're giving up the rights. So I never did host a game. But the NHL was the jewel of that job. Because even though in those early 90s years the Jets were not good, we did have Solani's great season, which was very exciting. But the team itself, not much was expected of it, and it didn't deliver.
Nope.
But every night, it didn't matter because the Red Wings are here and they're good, you know, or the Leafs or the Bruins or whomever. There were no Columbus Blue Jackets at that time, teams you didn't care about. So it was always an event at an NHL game. Then the IHL shows up. You've got maybe 5,000 people in the building, and the opposition means nothing. It was like going to a Goldeyes game, where oftentimes you go to a Goldeyes game, you might not even know who they're going to play. Because, well, who Sioux City, Sioux Falls, what difference does it make?
No, you got Wichita. No.
Yeah, yeah. Like, unless something happens where there's a bench clearing brawl between the Goldeyes and another team, and now they're back, you know, there used to be a good rivalry with Fargo. I don't know if there still is now. But anyway, the visiting teams in the IHL brought nothing. The Manitoba Moose did develop a bit of a rivalry with the Chicago Wolves.
Mm-hmm.
So that created some cachet, but it was never the same. The job was never the same. It was like a demotion. So anyway, that was the beginning of the end of sports for me, because that reduced a huge creative component in that the visiting players are not story topics.
Right.
So you think about how big that is. 41 nights of the year, you've got NHL stars visiting. Now subtract those 41 nights, and all you've got is your own minor league hockey team. So that was the beginning of the end. And so then by 2000, I guess it was, when the station approached me to take over the news department, I thought, yeah, TV sports is not a growth industry anymore. Mm-hmm. And sadly, I was right about that. Then a couple of years later, I would leave TV because I saw the writing on the wall there that TV news was not a growth industry. So I got out while the getting was good in 2002, before the internet really took hold and people realized, well, the idea of people hanging around waiting till 6 o'clock to sit down for an hour to watch news, the number of people willing to do that is going to be going like this forever. It will never increase again. So I got out while the getting was good and went to Red River, and had a wonderful experience there. Created the broadcast journalism program in partnership with a guy I worked with at CTV. And that was that was a wonderful experience. And that too that suited me better in that I wasn't so much a public figure. I was a performer in the classroom, and that's where it ended. You know, there was nobody outside of work wanting to talk to me about teaching. I didn't get recognized because of teaching.
Yeah, it's I can't help but think too during that time where you exited Barbara Lee Edwards. She went to San Diego, I believe. San Diego
Yes, they're
there for
still there.
CBS, right? And
Yeah.
just yeah, kind of that transition. I know there was other ones as well. But yeah, you kind of, as you say, you kind of saw the writing on the wall, and it was. Yeah, by the sounds of it, going to Red River, that kind of fit more of your niche. Going back to, hey, I just want to teach social studies.
Yeah. Yeah. It had always been part of my plan to go to education after my broadcast career. I went earlier than I thought. I always thought it would be something more around age 50, but
Hmm.
I'm not sorry I went when I did at 39. I had a ton of energy. We did a lot of good things there. We were way ahead of the curve. Um, Whereas a lot of those broadcast programs that have been in place at other schools for 30 or 40 years, they were shackled by old equipment, old ideas, the college bureaucracy. We created our program from a blank slate. We had state of the art everything and carte blanche to do whatever we wanted.
Right.
So we created a program that was so far ahead of the rest of the country. In fact, after I left, they scaled back the newscast that we did in our weekly class to help the new instructor get familiar. Like they removed live hits and made it a much more bare bones. And even then, so we never entered the newscast in any awards. We weren't aware they were even out there, but they became aware after I left. So they entered the newscast 2 years in a row and it won everything. And after those 2 years, the Broadcast Educators Association said, you can keep submitting, but we'd rather you didn't because you're going to win every year
Right.
because you were created in a contemporary sense right now. Nobody else even has the technical capabilities to do things like live hits. So that's how far ahead of the curve. That program at Red River did a live streaming, internet streaming newscast 1 hour before the pros even did it. So that was a right place at the right time.
Yeah, that is wild to think, and it is a long time ago, but it really isn't that long ago. If you
Yeah.
and if
Depending on how you look at it,
yeah.
feels like a long time ago. 2002 was when I started. So I guess it is over 20 years ago. But at the same time, the older you get, the faster time goes. And for somebody who's 40, 23 years ago seems like a long time. But when you're 61, as I am now, 23 years ago doesn't seem like that long.
Nope. Yeah, I'm 46 and my kids think I'm old, so I can only imagine when I get to 61 how that's going.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we have definitely covered a lot of ground here, Steve.
We have.
It's this has been quite the treat to have you on. Was there anything else you'd want to cover or that I haven't covered? I think I only make a few notes because usually the conversation kind of blossoms from there, which it has. But yeah, is there anything else you'd like to cover or
I
uh,
don't think
talk
so,
more into
Steve.
detail?
Pardon me?
Or talk more into detail?
I don't think so.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I don't really know anymore
Mhm.
what people want to know about me or if anything. Like there is a significant portion of the population out there that is offended by any media appearance I do since my crimes because they see it as me somehow profiting from my crimes, getting attention from my crimes.
Yeah.
I don't see it that way. I see it as, if anything, I'm getting attention from my downfall. That's different than the crimes themselves.
Right.
You know, so anyway, um, if you think of other things or people give you feedback of things they'd like to know, well, then perhaps you could have me on again. Um,
I'll definitely have you on again. And I think at the end of the day, what matters is what you think. Because we can say what reality is out there, and we always hear the noise, but at the end of the day, Steve Vogelsang did it for this, and maybe and not perceived of what other people would think it would be.
well, I do appreciate you having me on because, as I say, not everybody is in support of that. Um, you know, we say everybody loves a comeback. That's not completely true. There are many people that think once you've done what I've done, you should be punished for the rest of your life. Done.
Yeah.
Cut that guy out of society and forget him. He is a bank robber, a bad person. End of story. Not he was a teacher, he was a sportscaster, he cared about his students, he he contributed to his community. None of that stuff. There will be people that will criticize you for having me on. Well, don't you know the guy's just a bank robber? I was one. Not anymore, but I was one.
Right. You were, but you're not that now. And by the sounds of it, you're making strides with being that mental health advocate and helping people in those areas. And yeah, it's been awesome to have you on to tell your story. And I've had people on a second time, so I mean that door is always open there, Steve.
Well, I'm happy to come back. We didn't get too early in the CFL season to be talking football. Um,
Well, what
but
I noticed is three teams are 0-2 in the East, and somebody's going to host a playoff game in the second seed. So
yes,
that we
yes,
do know.
yeah, yeah. Uh, well, there is, and we won't get into the CFL thing now, but I actually, I, it always concerns me when the Eastern teams are weak because the demise of the CFL will occur as a product of its failure in the East.
Yeah.
Winnipeg and Saskatchewan, Edmonton and Calgary will one day find they don't have a league to play in anymore because the CFL said, without viable franchises in Toronto and Hamilton, maybe Montreal and Ottawa, it it's just not a thing. And as Westerners, we can get worked up about that if we want, but the fact remains, without a healthy franchise in Toronto, the league is in trouble. And I don't just mean a winning franchise,
No.
I mean one where people go to the games.
Yeah, and I've had people on that have had podcasts for the Argos that go to games, and they say, people have to kind of pick and choose. But yet you can get, the notion is Leafs sell out. Hey, if the Jays are hot, hey, they'll show up there too. I have seen BMO Field from a distance. Hey, if I lived in Toronto, I'd probably go see a game. But I looked ahead. What in the Sam Hill are the Argos playing the Riders on a possible game seven? And could you imagine if the Leafs were playing a game seven in the Stanley Cup Finals, nobody would show up?
Yeah,
What in the
it
Sam Hills?
yeah, it just there the CFL oftentimes cannot get out of its own way.
Right.
I'll just share an anecdote with you and I'll let you go. And this is indicative of how far back the CFL's lack of awareness goes. And the CFL in my day also was guilty of being way more arrogant than they deserved to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a thing or two about arrogance. Anyway, we used to go every year, whether the Bombers were in it or not. We covered the Grey Cup. Cost us a small fortune. It was a big undertaking because in those days, you didn't go with a laptop. We took two big editing decks that traveled in wooden crates.
Mm-hmm.
So the Grey Cup is in Edmonton. So at great expense, we go and we cover it, even though the Bombers aren't in it. My seat, because I'm not so football writers that travel with teams, they are in the main press box.
Right.
Other media that's just covering the Grey Cup, they're in the secondary press box, which was in the end zone. Unheated. No heat. They didn't think to tell us that. Guys are there in suits and dress shoes. No heat. And my seat, and I'm not exaggerating a word of this, is behind a concrete pillar. It's a numbered seat. So I say to the media guy, why would you put a seat behind a concrete pillar? To which he says with snotty indignation, there's a monitor right there. To which I said, we didn't come to Edmonton for me to watch the Grey Cup on a television.
Yeah.
So anyway, I scooch over so I'm not behind the concrete thing in this unheated press box. Then at halftime, and the media, like an army, marches on its stomach. At halftime, they bring in this chafing pan of cold steamed hot dogs. They know how many seats there are in the press box, but they don't bring enough hot dogs for everybody. So you go the whole game without eating. It's freezing. Guys had obstructed views. So that was the last year we ever went to a Grey Cup again.
Was that the Grey Cup in 97?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you're the NFL, you can treat the media like that.
Right.
But the CFL, we were the last television station in Canada to still cover the Grey Cup with a person live on the ground. And the CFL screwed that up. So that was an example going back that far, more than 25 years ago, that the CFL was not thinking about how do we best promote our product.
Yeah.
That is not what drives the CFL. I don't know what does, but the scheduling in Toronto and the failure to even come up with 25,000 fans 9 times a year in a city of over 3 million people, that suggests that you're not paying attention.
You're definitely not. And even go back to last Saturday, so that was another game in the Stanley Cup Finals. I don't get it. Again, there's a whole Pandora box there. It makes absolutely no sense. And this fact that the Toronto is starving for the NFL, that is the greatest myth. I don't know, since I don't know what.
Well, an even greater myth is that the NFL is starving for Toronto.
Yes, that's right. No, not at
The
all.
the
The
NFL
Toronto
couldn't
series
care
is terrible.
less if
Yeah,
there's a team in Toronto.
right. They're more concerned about having teams in Berlin and Europe and all of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Peter King has written documentary or not. He's written articles about this in Sports Illustrated. Yes.
Well, San Diego doesn't have a team anymore. All the team in Toronto would do is do what the NHL, where, oh God, now we've got this team from Toronto, the worst road draw in the league,
Yeah.
is coming to play us.
Right.
And that's the game that our fans skip because They don't care about Toronto. They don't even really know where it is, other than it's in Canada. Players don't want to play there because the taxes are higher. It becomes this albatross.
Yes.
Uh, so, yeah, that's very much a myth that the NFL is waiting for the CFL to collapse. If the NFL wanted to go into Toronto, it would have by now.
Yeah, no question about it. And I was at that preseason game in 2019 here in Winnipeg. That was atrocious. That was awful. And, they wrecked the field and everything else. Tickets completely overpriced. Utter joke. Now,
Yeah.
if you go to Kansas City, you get to the tailgate at 10:30 in the morning for a 3:25 kickoff, they do it right. So
Yes.
if you go there, you will not be disappointed. If you are, come talk to me.
It because the NFL gets out of Canada what it needs,
Mhm.
television viewership.
Exactly.
And it still sells its share of hats and jerseys in Canada. Doesn't need a franchise here.
No. And if Canadian stars, guys that grew up in Canada, are making it big in the NFL, well, then that's huge, right? We see this in the NBA with the guy from Oklahoma City. Uh,
Yeah.
grew up in Hamilton. You probably grew outside of Ireland Stadium. You could play on that narrative and probably watch tapes of, David Winfield, or not David Winfield, but you know what I'm talking about. Uh,
Yeah.
those inspirations. Um, that have played a mark in his life, just all these things, right? So you get
Yeah.
that 49th parallel. That's
Yeah.
those are topics. Just
Yeah.
want to say that.
All right. Well, I certainly have extended the length of your podcast today. There's no doubt about that.
It's
Long-winded.
all good. I did my chores before, and to quote Brian Williams, we are 12:22 Central Time, and we are
All right.
10:22
Well,
in Pacific.
thanks again, Steve, for having me on. I do appreciate it.
No
Uh,
worries.
and I'm happy to come back anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Take care, Steve, and God bless.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, no worries. Take care. Bye.
Bye.